Okay, so now we're going to talk about adding and subtracting complex numbers. This isn't too bad. We'll see how you kind of feel about multiplication, but we'll worry about that when we get to that. So first thing, standard form of complex numbers. So we talked about this before. Standard form is a plus bi. A is your real part, bi is your imaginary part. So when your answers, you should have your plain number first, then your imaginary number, okay? So to add or subtract complex numbers, combine the real parts and the imaginary parts separately. So you just combine like terms. So the first thing you look at is you look at there's a plus here. So I have a 5, a 7i, plus a negative 2i, plus a 6i. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to combine my like terms. So I'm going to combine my plain old numbers. I have a 5 and a negative 2. 5 plus negative 2 is 3. And then I also have my 7i and my 6i. They're both plus, so it's 13i. That's all you have to do there. It gets a little tricky when you have minus, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to put a 1 there. So anytime you have a negative, you treat it like a negative 1. And I want you to do distributive property because it does make things a little bit easier. So we're going to have our 8 plus 3i minus 2 minus 4i because I did distributive property. Once I do my distributive property, then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to combine my like terms. So I have a positive 8 and a negative 2. So that's going to be 6. And then I have my positive 3i and my negative 4i, which is going to be negative 1i, or you could also have just plain old I. Both of those are acceptable answers. Okay. This one here, just a couple of steps. First thing I want to do is I'm going to distribute my negative 2. So I have a 7 minus 6 minus 4i, because I multiply like normal. I combine my like terms. I have a positive 7 and a negative 6. So that's going to be 1 minus 4i. And that's it for that one. This one's a few more steps, so I look at my parentheses. Anytime I have a negative, I'm going to have to do distributive property. If it's not negative, you actually don't have to worry about distributive property. So I'm going to distribute a negative 1 to here and here. So that's going to be 6i. Negative 1 times 14 is negative 14. Negative 1, I'm going to put a 1 here. There is a 1 there. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive I, or 1i. Plus, I don't have anything to distribute. If you really want to, you can distribute a positive 1. It doesn't change my problem when there's addition. 5 minus 3i. So I combine my like terms. I'm going to combine my plain numbers. So I have a negative 14 and a positive 5. Negative 14 plus 5 is negative 9. And I have a 6i here, a 1i, a positive 1i, and a negative 3i. 6 plus 1 is 7. 7 minus 3 is 4. So this is going to be negative 4i. And that's my answer there. Okay. Now we're going to get into multiplication. To start with, it's not too tricky. It just gets a little bit trickier. Just just make sure you can take your time. So the one thing that you have to remember with multiplication is I squared is equal to negative 1. Just like when we simplify, you have to know that the square root of negative 1 is I. So after you multiply, replace all of your I squareds with negative 1 every single time. So we're going to get into the habit of this. I'm going to take you through it. So these first two are just simple distributive property. So this is going to be 2 times 8. Okay, so this is going to be 2i times 8 minus 2i times 3i. I multiply my numbers, 16i, and you don't have to do this every single time, minus 2 times 3 is 6, I times I is I squared. Now, like I said, when you have an I squared, you replace it with negative 1. So I'm going to rewrite this. This is going to be 16i minus 6, but instead of I squared, I'm going to replace that with a negative 1. So I have 16I plus 6. I want to write it in standard form, so I need to just make sure that I write my number first, and then this is a plus 16I, and that's your final answer. For this next one, this is going to be, I'm going to put a 1 here just to remind you. Okay, so anytime you just have a negative and there's no number there, put a negative 1 next to it. It can be quite helpful. So I'm going to do distributive property. This is going to be negative 1I times negative 2 plus negative 1I times 10I. I multiply my numbers. Negative 1 times negative 2 is just 2. And then I have my I. I have negative 1 times 10 is negative 10. I times I is I squared. So first you do your distributive property, multiply it out, then you replace all of your I squareds. My I squared is equal to negative 1. So I just replace my I squared with negative 1. So this is going to be 2I plus negative 10 times negative 1. 2I plus 10. I rewrite it to put it in standard form. 10 plus 2.